you know, George and those guys originally were the scrappy young auteur startups, right? They had to prove themselves. And then they became very much a part of the system. They became very much the system through their success. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I just think
People will
George,
go into their movies.
well, yeah, man. And I just think that George has different, he's in a completely different mindset than he was when he sat down to write those original three or even plot the original three. Milius has said many times that George gets all this credit for being good with mythology when he's really not. He really doesn't understand mythology. He just thinks he does. And Milius has always thought that the genius really behind George was Marcia, his ex-wife, who's the one that edited Empire and edited Star Wars behind the scenes and edited Jedi. And when he got divorced from Marcia, a lot of that, a lot of his creative choices and projects changed. But either way, I will say this: as flawed as those first three Star Wars prequels from George Lucas are, they're very good in comparison to the garbage that we get from Kathleen Kennedy, who, I will remind everyone, started out as John Milius's secretary. Okay,
Right.
Kathy Kennedy was John Milius's secretary, and I think a lot of this stuff with Kathy and the Force is female and all of this.
So long, gay boys.
Let the hate flow.
Female characters, and I think a lot of it's comeuppance. I think she resents all of the years that she worked for the boys, whether it's Spielberg, Lucas, Milius, Brian De Palma, Paul Schrader, any of those guys that came up, the 70s USC mafia, as they're called, all of those auteur directors that the studios turned to in the late 70s, early 80s and said, we have these failing studios and we need creatives to turn it around. And you guys, we're going to take some real risks on guys like you and Ridley Scott and Adrian Lyne and Paul Verhoeven and the rest. And those were all good risks. Those risks all paid off.
Oh,
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great
so,
director.
But I think Kathy being involved, I think it's kind of like, oh, well, we did all this for the boys all those years, and now it's going to be all for the girls. That's the way I see it, and that's sort of the gist that I get from Kathy and the creative direction and all this stuff. This is some kind of weird comeuppance, or the boys had the boys had their time in the 80s and the 90s, and now I'm in charge, so the girls are going to come first. And in that, they betray these brands which were created for boys and were male centric, and it's no different than the comics. All these comics that you and I grew up with, largely a male audience. I would say probably 90%.